And we have, unfortunately, this has been a very challenging night for a number of counselors. So we are going to proceed, and this is recorded, and we may need to make some accommodations somehow to come back if there are questions. But I apologize for the conflicts, a couple of work, a couple of personal. So and they're emergencies, and it is what it is. Okay, so we're going to call the 6:30 special committee meeting of the whole to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. We have Madonna King with us. Madonna, can you proceed with roll call? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Ms. Blanks?
Yeah, she's might be late, so she's not here right now.
Ms. Cantor?
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan?
Here.
Ms. Fay?
Here.
Mr. Davidoff?
Here.
Mr. Gold?
Here.
Mr. Winograd? Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Williams? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. King. So we have a core group. We have a quorum of 5, which is acceptable for this kind of a meeting. Again, I apologize. This is being recorded. I know a lot of work has gone into the presentation, and we will make sure that people see everything and hear everything. So, all right, with that, over to you. I think I will give it to Mr. Hart, and he will hand it over to whoever is going to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Council, and thank you for attending tonight's budget session. So this evening, we're going to review 4 departmental budgets with you. We decided to wait on the Health District, even though it's on your agenda. We will bring them in at a future date. But we are going to review the budgets for the Fire Department, the Police Department, Community Development, and Plant and Facility Services. Based on your good feedback, we're going to run tonight's session a little bit differently than we did last time around. We're going to ask each director to make a presentation and then pause for questions. I have asked each director to talk a little bit about the work that their department does, their highlights from the current year, some of their primary goals for next year, and then to speak to the numbers in their budget, any significant changes on either the revenue side or the expenditure side. So that's what we're prepared to do this evening. And Mayor, my suggestion is that we pause after each director has had an opportunity to present for Q&A, and then we can do one final Q&A at the end as well. And Mr. Privatera and the other members of the budget team and I are here to assist.
Thank you. So who are we starting with? Are we starting with fire?
We will start with the Fire Department. Yes, Mayor.
Okay. So Chief Priest, over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. I hope you were able to enjoy a beautiful day outside, because I'm joined here at my presentation by my right-hand man assistant, Fire Chief Hugh O'Callahan, and we're appropriately socially distanced, vaccinated, and the windows are open for us to enjoy some of this spring air while maintaining our safe pandemic practices. Chief Cintigali and Deputy Fire Marshal Grimaldi are also joining us tonight from Town Hall. So I'd like to start by thanking the Town Council for your guidance, leadership, and efforts to manage and communicate our community's needs over the last year. Furthermore, your support of the fire department has been welcomed and appreciated by me and the men and women of the department that I am proud to represent. It goes without saying, the last year or more has been a challenge for us due to the loss of our beloved brother firefighter, Joe Mangione, in August, a pandemic, a historic storm, and your support has been invaluable and comforting to us. As you likely know, the main responsibilities of the fire department are to provide for public safety through emergency preparedness, emergency response, and community risk reduction. We accomplish this through 4 fundamental divisions or areas, namely emergency management, operations, our fire marshals, and our support staff. Emergency management is our community planning and emergency preparedness section, made famous by Bob McHugh on the telephone listening in tonight. Just a quick note to the council, thank you so much for approving his position last year. Certainly has kept some of my sanity, what is left of it. Operations is headed by Chief O'Callahan, and comprises the most visible areas of the department, namely our fire suppression, rescue services, and emergency medical response. Chief Cincigali manages the fire marshal's office with responsibility for inspections, plan review, and fire investigations. And our support staff are embedded across all divisions, and they enable us to carry out the mission and encompass areas such as training, EMS support, administration, fleet, and this year, our pandemic-specific support. Now, before we move into the specific accomplishments, I wanted to frame them by telling you exactly how proud I am. I'm really humbled to be part of this team of folks who enabled me to speak about the work that has been done over the last year. They've been on the front lines of this response in all aspects of this pandemic, whether in response or in planning, and they've done so while facing uncertainty and great personal risk. They've shown bravery, compassion, innovation, excellence, and have done so while accepting, creating, and leveraging new partnerships to ensure we have a blanket of protection for our community. Any credit you attribute tonight definitely goes to the men and women of the fire department who surround me. My hat goes off to them, and I'm honored to represent them. In the last year, we responded to over 9,200 calls, approximately 67% of which were medically related. And many, if not all, of those EMS calls required that all the personnel were dressed in numerous layers of personal protective equipment in very challenging working conditions. As an all hazards department, we ensured a high degree of fire protection. We fought 2 fires, which tragically resulted in the loss of life, and our condolences to those who were affected. Additionally, we had a fire involving significant property loss to a large home on Prospect Ave, which, while attracting a lot of attention, was among the list of several other fires across town, which were controlled by West Hartford Fire Department personnel. We responded to a historic storm, during which time we went to 155 calls for service in one day, and we stood ready to assist our partners in the West Hartford Police Department as we all faced and embraced the needed improvements in the social fabric of our country. We restored a company officer inspection program to increase the number of required inspections, and we were selected as a site for a pilot community risk reduction program by the NFPA. With much assistance from ERC manager Todd Hungerford and his dispatch staff and many others, we participated in rolling out an in-house emergency medical dispatch program, or EMD, which allows us to triage calls and be more efficient with the use of town medical resources. Expedited by the pandemic, the fire department changed our deployment, which resulted in lighter duty vehicles being used for paramedic response. The most noticeable highlight of the year was the response to our pandemic, and where our accomplishments are most visible. We've responded to numerous people infected by COVID-19, and we've seen an increase in out-of-hospital cardiac arrests, a very life-threatening situation. We've implemented innovative testing programs for our personnel, implemented new guidelines to improve the safety of our employees, and both are being used as reference examples for agencies across Connecticut. We've assisted with the design and implementation of the town's incident command system and the structures to support community needs. We've engaged, supported, and encouraged partnerships with collaborations at levels not experienced before, especially with our police department, health district, and social services, all in support of our community. Our collaborative efforts have resulted in very successful bike team, mobile vaccinations, vaccine clinic support, and outreach to heavily populated areas, as well as our vulnerable or underserved residents. The accomplishments to date are quite numerous, and I wish I could provide more and attribute it to individuals or our partner agencies. But in summary, the level of service to the community during these times and the reception of these services by our community has been outstanding. Looking forward into fiscal year 22, our goals are to increase the inspection program inside of our marshal's office. We have demonstrated improvement already with the team now filled out, and now we're supplementing it. We are expecting more. Our emergency management program has been invaluable, and we intend to continue to support and build it, especially in the community emergency response team area and updating our local emergency operations plan. We seek to maintain our current level of pandemic support and outreach through targeted planning and collaborations, and we're engaged looking at the future and preparing to support our residents and neighbors if needed. We will be concentrating on funding opportunities and reimbursement options to reduce the cost of any current or future initiatives to the town. And as part of the continued pandemic response, we will closely watch the trends while strategically moving to an EMS model that we can sustain with the authorized staff of 21. Over the next year, we expect to move to a deployment model without the need to supplement our emergency response with staffing associated with emergency protective measures. And this will involve placing one fire apparatus back online as a 4-person paramedic/suppression company. And as the lessons learned from the pandemic increase, we will research in greater detail the opportunities to both maintain or improve services such as mobile intensive healthcare, sometimes called community-based paramedics. Unrelated to the pandemic, we're in need of new employees to fill vacant positions. We seek to improve the size and diversity of our applicant pools, a topic I recently discussed with the Public Safety Committee in greater detail. We've implemented measures to remove barriers such as resending new employees to the Fire Academy. We've increased our outreach. We've carefully selected a strategy that will allow us to recruit emergency medical technicians as well as paramedics. We'll be scanning the horizon for new hazards and looking for grants and other opportunities to help us address the pandemic while carefully ensuring that we are offsetting the costs to the town. Lastly, our goal is to continue and expand our partnerships and collaborations for outreach and control the pandemic with our peer agencies in the police department, social services, the health district, the school district, and others. Our overriding goal is to be proactive, forward-thinking, to connect with our community, and above all, to provide exemplary service. For this year's budget, we are presenting a current services budget, which is increased only to address contractually obligated increases. Our budget request overall is for a 0.8% increase, with the majority attributed to a contractual wage increase for personnel. Approximately $15,000 in total additional is requested to support the service contracts needed to maintain tracking and record software for people and equipment. And the largest increase of that $15,000 for non-personal areas is a maintenance contract for telestaff, which is a scheduling program we share with the PD, and our portion is approximately $8,000. Telestaff was procured under some IT funds several years ago. Speaking to the fire department revenues, the last fiscal year total was $1.4 million. Current year revenue is $708,000 fiscal year to date, and next year we are assuming for $1.1 million. The reduction is due to a decrease in EMS revenue, and it's offset slightly by an increase in fire marshal plan review fees. And as I referenced earlier, we're seeking all avenues to improve the town finances and have the potential to offset our lost EMS revenue through the American Recovery Act. While this concludes the proposed increased justification and the revenues associated, I would be remiss if I did not comment on the fire department overtime. This chronic and visible issue observed consistently over a period of years, and the fire department overtime is distributed equally to qualified volunteers first, and using volunteers precludes forced overtime. Prior to my tenure, the town, working with the union, successfully reduced the long-term pension obligations for greater than half the workforce while still offering a competitive benefits package. Specific to the causes of overtime, 56% of fire department overtime is related to covering shifts created by vacant positions in the operations division. 27% of the fire department overtime is related to covering vacation, sick, and family sick leave. In these two categories alone, this accounts for 83% of the fire department overtime. As you know, the Fitch study indicated that the fire department is appropriately sized for our current service levels, and our focus has been on filling vacant positions. This has been a major challenge for the fire department. In fiscal year 17, according to HR, there were 9 vacancies. Since fiscal year 17, 38 employees have departed, 34 have been hired to replace. And since fiscal year 18, we have run 13 hiring processes, 2 of which are still open. The last process closed resulted in 1 employee being hired, and he's currently in the academy. Also notable relative to fire department overtime is that in order to remove the barriers and increase applicant pools, we have to accept the training lag, which is approximately 6 months long. This requires the town to cover both the salary costs of the new employee and the overtime for the vacant position while the new employee is in training. This affects our ability to have normal salary money available to cover the overtime costs. And we are facing challenges entering the next fiscal year with our current vacancies and approximately 19% of our workforce eligible to retire. But we're taking action to attract candidates who are both trained and untrained alike. And this is certainly a complicated problem on many fronts. Moving in a positive fashion, I am committed to the current staffing and levels of service while at the same time seeking to implement ways to reduce unreimbursable overtime without reducing the effectiveness of the fire department. Currently, $523,000 is pending in front of FEMA for fiscal year 20 and 21 expenses. And our revenue year to date, as I mentioned previously, is $708,000 and climbing. While we struggle with these vacancies, it also presents opportunities for us to improve our hiring strategies and the overall diversity of our workforce. The response data speaks to a busy and effective fire department with a 2020 response time average of approximately 3.29 minutes, and that's per ERC manager Todd Hungerford. I frequently receive information about positive patient outcomes, and I've observed a high degree of competency in suppressing and investigating fires, as well as other related performance. As I conclude my budget presentation, while there's certainly an exhaustive list of folks to thank, many of whom I tried to capture generally previously, there are a few unsung heroes whose names may not get included too often, but Amy Krause, Melissa Marquis, Dan Civelli, Aaron Brown, Patty Lewis, Astrid Calderon, Lisa Newton. I'll stop there. I'm certainly working on being less comprehensive or long-winded, but I'll stop. But I'd like to offer my personal thanks to the executive team here in the fire department, as well as town manager Hart and finance director Privatera, as well as a special shout out to my valued peer and friend Chief Riddick, who's joining us tonight. Your support from all of you is truly felt and it's appreciated. So lastly, I'll draw your attention to the level of service that the men and women of the West Hartford Fire Department provide to the residents of this town. While it's a lofty goal, I hope that I've represented them with the same level of regard and care that they provide to our citizens. And I'm committed to leading them to the best of my ability and to work closely with our elected and senior staff officials to ensure that our residents receive the level of fire and EMS service that keeps West Hartford the premier community that it is. The position of the council is immeasurably challenging, and my hat is off to you. I look forward to me or any member of my team on the phone tonight to answer any questions that you may have of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Priest. It has been quite a year, and there has been, I think, your clear leadership, your clear innovative thinking, and your willingness, and not only willingness, eagerness to partner, to support, to collaborate with a variety of departments has really been impressive. And I know the response to the COVID would have been different if we hadn't had your leadership, but also all of the members of the department putting in their all every day. So with really appreciative of all. And I really have seen it firsthand, and I'm extremely grateful. I did have a quick question before I open to the floor. On the revenue side, it showed the numbers that you had stated are just a slightly different than, now I lost the page, so I think you had said at 1.4 million last year, and I had 935,000 on page 811 in our budget books, and I don't know. And then for 2020 to 2021, it was adopted at 750,000, and the actual was 384,000. I think that's the I'm guessing this, I'm not sure. So, and you had mentioned 708,000, so I wasn't sure. I just didn't know if you could explain that.
So I will first give our friends from finance an opportunity to interject if they have anything before I say anything. But I am looking at a munis report from our last year's revenues. As far as the year to date, that is off of a current fiscal year to date. So Peter, or at least anybody, any comments on that? Or Mayor, I can take it more specifically as a question and respond to you afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Privatera, I don't know if you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
With respect to the revenues that came in, I think some of those revenues were reimbursements from FEMA, so they would not have been categorized to the fire department. We would have put them in a general federal fund account. That's why there's such a large discrepancy. And with respect to adopted and projected revenues, when we adopted the revenues in the year, I think the fire chief was talking about, we adopted revenues at a normal rate. There was a drop in some revenue categories. I know that with some respect, the fire marshal's revenues dropped down a little. Some of the inspections couldn't be done. I also know that we're projecting a slight drop in some of the paramedic revenue. But I mean, without having the data in front of me, we can certainly reconcile it. But I do know that across the board, once the pandemic hit, we saw revenues drop in all areas. With fortunately tax revenue still coming in, but service revenue was dropping a little.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. So we will keep track of those lost revenue in sort of a category for whether it's the American Rescue Plan or just understanding what has been lost. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just to supplement Mr. Privatera's comments, we are doing exactly that. Ms. Lewis has a very comprehensive file that she's maintaining, and I saw some of it today.
Thank you. So not only do we have FEMA, the accounting for FEMA, which, and then, the whatever qualifies for that, which I know we're waiting on some clarifications still, and then our lost revenue that now the American Rescue Plan might cover. So just to clarify, right? Correct? Yes. Okay.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Not only that, but we're also identifying all the expenditures that we've made that were not reimbursable, or we're still arguing with FEMA about reimbursing. So it's a pretty comprehensive list right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera, because one of the points in discussions is that FEMA was 75% reimbursement, and that even 25% might be reimbursable under the new administration. We don't know that yet, but also costs that aren't necessarily FEMA reimbursable, how we can account for those as well. So thank you very much.
We're tracking those, and actually the town manager and I are meeting tomorrow afternoon to go over the list.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. And then I had another question, but I don't know what it is right now. I lost it. Okay, I'm going to go to any of my colleagues to see if they have questions. And I don't see everyone's face, so please, Mr. Davidoff, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I would echo your commentary with respect to the opening remarks about the performance of the department through this entire pandemic and the ability to work well with all the various departments, whether it be the health department, the police department, or any other social service department with respect to responding to the pandemic. So there's no question as to the performance that was received from the department. I do want to get back to the question about the revenues. So as I reviewed the budget, as the mayor pointed out on 8.3 and 813, I think one of them dealt with charges for services, and one of it was, I think, EMS services, and the other was for plan review. So I don't know what the total amount of revenue that is decreased, but when we look at the number from 2019 to 20 compared to what we're looking at for the current year, it seems to be down several hundreds of thousands of dollars over that period of time. So I don't know if that's something that would come under the FEMA part or the American Rescue Plan, but it just, comes out, pretty clear to me that those are something that we definitely need to capture before budget adoption night. So I don't know if it's a question, but more of a statement there. I do have a question. So I was at the public safety meeting. We talked about the vacancies in the department and how that drives our overtime needs. So have we worked on a model or a projection or a scenario where if we hire X amount of people over a certain period of time, it decreases our need to have overtime for the department? So there must be some type of sliding scale. As you get more full-time people, obviously you eliminate overtime shifts that are necessary to perform the duties, since we're at that 84 person model and how many people we have to have on per hour. So through you, Madam Mayor, if someone could answer as to whether or not we're looking for something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Chief Priest, we'll start with you.
So, Deputy Mayor Davidoff, to be clear, what you're asking is have we considered increasing the amount of full-time employees we have to decrease the amount of overtime that the fire department expends?
I'm
Davidoff?
sorry, Madam Mayor. Can I clarify my question?
Yes, Mr. Davidoff, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Leon Davidoff. Chief, so what I'm saying is the number of people in the department is a set number. So we know what that number is. I think we have 84 people. We're all in agreement on that. But we're running a certain amount of vacancies in the department not to be able to do that, which necessitates the need for overtime. So obviously we're not going to be able to fill all those vacancies come July 1. That's not going to happen. So my question is, have we worked out a model where if X amount of people join the department, assuming nobody retires, creating more holes, okay? Is there a way you can show us if, let's just say we get 3 more people on, how that affects the overtime in the department with respect to shifts being covered? Because there's got to be, some point. Is that clear what I'm asking?
Yeah. So,
Mr. Davidoff, Chief Priest?
there you go. So the answer, sir, is yes, we can make a correlation with the amount of vacancies that we have with the projected amount of overtime that will be spent as a result of that. And part of that has to take into consideration the training lag of about 6 months in time for that. So, I work very closely with Town Manager Hart and Director Privatera to make sure that I'm communicating what vacancies we have. And in consultation with both of them, we have a fairly good idea of, what the costs of the fire department are going to be relative to vacancy overtime. And I would defer to either of them to expand on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Priest. Mr. Privatera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, we work on that a lot. What throws us off is the significant number of retirements that happen during the course of the year. So we have a plan, and we can put a plan in place, but then if we have a significant number of retirees, it throws it all off. We also recognize that there will always be overtime because units are taken offline for training, firefighters are injured on duty, firefighters take vacations. So we recognize that there will be overtime, but for the past year or two, maybe even 3 to some extent, the problem has been exacerbated by 2 issues. Number one is that the high number of people that are retiring, and then number 2, actually finding qualified firefighter paramedics, and as well as having them go through the fire academy. So I think Chief Priest and I work on it a lot. We talk about it a lot, and we try to get it down to a level that we think is reasonable. I mean, the only reason we identify unfunded positions in the budget is because at any point in time during the fiscal year, the fire department will have a number of firefighter vacancies because of retirement. So we just try to maximize what we can. But we do recognize that if there was a full complement of firefighters, then yes, that would have a positive impact on overtime.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Mr. Davidoff, anything further?
Yes, so I just want to make sure I understand this. So if I look at the numbers here, it can vary, the percentage of overtime dollars spent to regular pay can go anywhere between 20 to 30%, according to the numbers that are in this book. So my question is there a target that we should be aiming for with respect to dollars spent on overtime compared to dollars spent on regular pay?
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Mr. Privatera? I don't know.
That's a hard question to answer because, again, what you're asking is there a target we can shoot for? And again, with the variances in staffing levels, it's hard to say. But I mean, my understanding is over the next year or two, when we get past this hump where there's going to be a lot of people retiring, and there's going to be more certainty in the staffing levels that we have, then yes, a model like that certainly could be put into place. But right now, I think a chief priest is recruiting right now for personnel, and my guess is that more are going to retire next fiscal year. And before we just move on, I just wanted to make a comment. The drop in that revenue line item was due to a drop in paramedic runs from last year to this year. That's why it was down so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Deputy Mayor, I do not have an exact answer to your question, although I think we could generate one. Another important point to remember is we do not overstaff. And that's a deliberate decision we've made. As you said, we have 84 line positions. Some departments may carry 90 or some number of additional positions, people who are available to fill the vacant shifts. You're always going to have every shift probably has at least one vacancy, just because the show up rate, whether it's 75 or 80%, people are either on some type of leave or in a training status or something else where they're not available to work the line. So we're always going to need some level of overtime just for that purpose alone. And then when you have the record number of retirements that we've experienced over the last couple of years, it really exacerbates the issue as we've described. So I think what we could prepare for you is probably a model that would show us if we have filled the vast majority of our vacancies, here's what we think our overtime should be. And then prepare a couple of other scenarios as well based on the number of vacancies we're projecting over the next couple of years. So I think we could work on that analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Davidoff?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Kerrigan?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that presentation, Chief Priest. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, as the mayor did, the phenomenal work that you as well as Chief Reddick did during a very challenging time. This pandemic really has stressed out those who are in charge of our safety, and both of you have done a phenomenal job. And I'm sure I only know of a little glimpse of the work that the two of you have done, so I'm thankful for that. And I also appreciate that you're staying so close to budget in terms of the contractual obligations. I just had a sort of a curiosity question. The paramedic runs were down, they were reduced. So what do you think happened with the person who may be having a heart attack that would typically call upon your service in need? I know that people were fearful of going to the hospital because of the pandemic, but from your perspective, why do you think less people called upon your service, the paramedic part of your service?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. I know I actually was thinking the same thing, but I have some ideas. But anyway, Chief Priest?
Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate it. So, first of all, it's anecdotal. If you're asking for an opinion, I'm glad to provide it. But I think you have hit the big thing, which is that sometimes people are concerned about obtaining health care in times of a pandemic. And that is also one of the reasons why they may be less likely to call. But laterally, there's also during the pandemic, if somebody did not require the paramedic to go in, or there was a paramedic on AMR, we allowed the patient to go in to reduce the risk to the responders while maintaining a very high level of care. And then I will just look to my Assistant Chief O'Callahan, who is very in tune on these, for any additional comments on that.
Yes, sir. We did experience a slightly higher number of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests that may have been attributed to people delaying and calling 911, so they don't expose themselves to the virus, and just wanting to stay home and maybe let it run, take its course. But as always, we encourage everybody, if you're feeling sick or feeling ill, to call 911, and we'll certainly come. I think that's part of it.
Thank you, Chief O'Callahan. Ms. Kerrigan, anything further?
Thank you for that. And that was my concern. So are you implying that more individuals suffered cardiac arrest at home because they failed to, or they didn't want to risk going to the hospital? Are we able to capture numbers like that?
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Chief O'Callahan, maybe directly to Chief O'Callahan.
Yes, we can certainly go capture that data for you. Chief Priest has it right here. I will say that we also, when the pandemic started, we did see that start to creep up. I'm sorry, the numbers creep down. So what we did is we went on a social media campaign encouraging people not to delay. We went out through Facebook and we went out through Twitter, so that people would actually call 911 or seek help through their medical providers, and encouraging them not to delay seeking medical attention.
So, Counselor, so the statistics show that in reviewing records between July and December of 2019, there were 29 incidents of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, of which 7 had a successful return of circulation. During the same time period in 2020, we had 43 out-of-hospital arrests with 10 restorations of circulation. So what I can say is that is data. The analysis of it becomes a little bit more tricky and turns into opinion. It's very difficult to find out specifically whether or not somebody hadn't called 911 due to fear of the coronavirus. So I hope that answers your question, ma'am.
It does.
Ms. Kerrigan?
Yeah, thank you. I just think that's very telling, and it's more fallout from this pandemic that usually we don't talk about. Again, I just want to thank you always, for you and your team, for putting your life on the line to keep us all safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. And just a note on the hazardous materials calls. I saw those went up pretty substantially from 2019 to 2020. Is that a similar dynamic in a little bit of a reverse order, in that people were home and there was maybe more things happening at home, maybe that were that were related to hazardous materials?
So, through you, Madam Mayor, Fire Chief Greg Priest answering. So as far as hazardous materials calls are considered on this document, we condense a lot of the categories of calls, and so that we have a very exhaustive list of different types of calls that we respond to, and they're captured in hazardous materials. I don't want anybody to think that, we've had lots of chemical spills, but, if you're asking for opinion, a little bit of conjecture, yes, having people home more, smells of chemicals, natural gas calls, these are things that fall into that. So I would also kind of take a small little bit of note in there that we've changed our record keeping software over the last few years. Certainly the way that things are categorized can cause some variations in where the data appears in this particular chart, such as hazmat versus, say, other calls for service. So we're getting much more refined with our data collection, and I'm pleased with our staff and how they're really trying to be accurate with where they record it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because there was a significant, and I think that was the way that you were, I remember hearing that before, the way that those were reported in 2016 and 17 to 2018. Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, we go to Chief Priest, and thank you very much for the presentation. yeoman's work you guys have been doing through this year. It's been truly impressive. A few questions, and just to piggyback on Deputy Mayor Davidoff, I just wanted to clarify very quickly. So if there's no staff vacancies, in theory, then the payroll goes down because there wouldn't be any overtime expenditures if effectively we would have a full contingency of staff in your department. So there would be a savings there is kind of what I was gathering from the answers. Is that an accurate statement?
Thank you, Mr. Gold. So Chief Priest?
Thank you. And Priest Fire Chief answering. So thank you, Councilor, for your commendations. I appreciate it. So the answer is overtime may go down related to vacancies. However, you still have to handle the overtime costs associated with the accrued leave that each employee would then be entitled to take. And because we don't overstaff the department, anytime somebody takes vacation, sick, family leave, or is not in their position in the organization for any other reason, that requires backfill overtime. The method to avoid that is by overstaffing the minimum on every shift, so that, say, for example, an employee takes a vacation day, you have another employee to replace them who's on straight time. Does that cover the answer?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Priest. Mr. Gold?
Yes, that does, and thank you. And I just want to make sure that some analysis, as Mr. Davidoff had suggested, be done so that we can identify that portion of it and see where there could possibly be savings on that end. Another topic I just wanted to talk about in terms of the EMT EMS calls that you were talking about relative to COVID and all that nature. Maybe you can expand a little bit more on how you would classify those calls, breaking it into a COVID related as opposed to a non-COVID related, and how are you categorizing the expenditures relative to those calls so that we can plan accordingly for the American Rescue Act monies.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. I'm going to go to Chief Priest, but I think Mr. Privatera might be also important to have him put on. So Chief Priest, we'll start with you.
So, Counselor, for every medical call, we generate an EMS report. It's an electronic health record. When a paramedic determines whether or not there are COVID-related symptoms, they can classify that. That's a statistic that we can make available to you for the amount of calls or the amount of people we've encountered who have a COVID-related illness. As far as specifically attributing standard full-time personnel costs that are responders to medical calls, I think that that's encompassing just we're paying for the time of the personnel to be on duty, whether or not they do 10 calls or 0 calls. So that cost isn't tracked. Any specific overtime or positions that are related to COVID, we are tracking. So I'm not sure if I got your answer perfectly, but I can turn it to Finance Director Privatera or any of his staff to answer more appropriately. I'll converse with my partner, he's giving an opportunity.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Priest. We'll go to Mr. Privatera first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly any calls related to COVID are being tracked. You know, it's difficult. We're still waiting for some guidance on the Rescue Act money because there is a provision in there that says that we can utilize premium pay for some of that expense. And, you know, if premium pay is considered overtime, if some of these firefighters our paramedics are working on overtime, then certainly we can apply that. It's kind of hard to come up with some answers when we don't have the parameters yet. But everything that is COVID related, both from a revenue loss and an expenditure, is going on a list that Patty Lewis is keeping, and it's getting to be considerable now. Once the guidance comes in, we're going to go through that list and see what's appropriate. You know, for instance, if we lost revenue in certain areas, we'll be taking that revenue in. If we expended money, for instance, if we expended money on unemployment comp that we didn't get reimbursed on, we'll be taking that money in. Relative to the fire department, If there's any expenditures that are over budget related to overtime or premium pay, we'll be counting that as well. So, without any further guidance, all we can do is compile, cast a wide net and then see what we can apply once we get the guidelines in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Back to you, Mr. Gold. Is that?
That
Is that-
answered that. Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I did have another question is relative to the vacancies and I guess the headhunting, so to speak, to replenish the fire department. Is there the problem in terms of finding applicants or available personnel? Is there a relationship to the duality and the need for having firefighter paramedic combination, or is it just a lack of personnel that are suitable for the department?
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Chief Priest.
Thank you for the question, Counselor. So we have a very long track record going back to, I believe, fiscal year 13 of hiring only paramedic licensed applicants. And the reasoning for that was to make sure that we were feeding all of the positions, because we do lose our licensed paramedics through internal attrition through the promotional process. So we were continually trying to hire at the paramedic level, which made it more challenging for us because it was a barrier for some applicants to be able to come in because they needed to have that level of licensure. Through the work of our staff, communication with town manager and Director Privatera, Chief O'Callahan's analysis of the department, we're now able to take and hire some EMTs as well. This will reduce our need to hire paramedics. We hope that will open up our applicant pools to be able to fill those vacancies. And then more importantly, we will continue a robust discussion about how we can fill our workforce and actually develop an applicant pool very early. We spoke about it at the Public Safety Committee meeting, which is we need to be in the schools. We need to start looking at innovative, expanded, measures to improve our applicant pool and the diversity of the applicant pool that's coming in.
Thank you, Chief Priest. Mr. Gold? Nothing further? Okay. I know Mr. Davidoff had just a clarification, I think, on something. Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. So I just want to see if I understand something. So if an employee was in quarantine, would the salary and the benefits of that employee be considered reimbursable either under FEMA or the American Rescue? If you don't have the answers yet, I know we don't have all the guidance, but that would be something to look at. And if that's the case, obviously we had to incur additional cost for their replacement, which may have triggered an overtime situation in that case. So I think that if the first condition is reimbursable under the either one of those two plans, I would presume naturally that the additional cost of the employee filling in for them would be fall into that category too. Or is my thinking not on point?
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Chief Priest? Or maybe Mr. Privatera, I'm not sure. We'll start with you, Chief Priest.
Oh,
Mr. Privatera, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
That's fine.
Yeah, again, that's a great question. Part of me is thinking this money wasn't meant to supplant any existing expenses. It's only to basically pay us back for any revenue loss or any additional expenses over and above what we would normally expend. But again, without the specifics as to how we can apply this money, we don't know at this time. But I appreciate that comment, and we'll certainly look into it once we get our guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. And just to follow up on that, that making sure that we have all of those records so those can be, again, accounted for in a potential column of recovery. Right. Okay. Mr. Davidoff, anything further on that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, and sorry to belabor the point. So I guess our Human Resources Department would probably be the place to be able to track that. Not only does this fall within the fire department, I also think other departments equally would have experienced that, whether it be our police department or public works or other people that were responding to anything to do with interaction with the public. So I just am thinking outside the box, but I really want us to be as wide net as possible to try to lessen the impact and get all the dollars we possibly can to be used for those purposes. So thank you for indulging me in that line of thinking.
Absolutely, Mr. Davidoff. And again, right, it would be applied across the staff. Okay, I know Ms. Fay has a question. We will go to you. Councilor Fay?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Cantor, through you, Councilor Mary Fay. So I think I was the first person who started talking about overtime in the public safety meeting. But before I ask my questions, I do value what you guys do. And Chief Priest and Chief O'Callahan, I know that if I had an emergency, I would dial 911 and you guys would respond right away, as well as Chief Riddick and his team. So whatever I ask and whatever I'm saying is not anything to do with how valuable and critical you are to the operations of our town. But when I started looking at the overtime, a couple things popped out. So, it seemed to be concentrated among, a few individuals where they were getting, 3 times their salary. So is there a way to know what the future benefit cost of the overtime will contribute to our pension liabilities or other things? That, I'm trying to think bigger than just the immediate cost in the budget, but I know overtime is a necessity, and I understand you have to manage people and fill vacancies and be there 24/7. So again, I value what you do and what you provide tremendously. But I'm just trying to figure out how do we kind of attack this in a thoughtful, forward-thinking approach. And I know you have vacancies and you have all those things, and we're always going to need some overtime, of course. But how can we, is there something we can do with staggering vacations or staggering training, or, kind of making it less consuming of the overtime dollars? Because again, I just worry about the long-term effects of that, not just so much the pay and the salary, but just, the ongoing liabilities that we'll have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Chief Priest?
Thank you, Counselor. So let me just, start by thanking you for acknowledging the work of folks. What I will say is prior to my tenure, 53% of the department was placed into a different pension plan, reducing the long-term obligations. We have other tiers that have different benefit packages moving forward. As far as operational ways of reducing overtime, staggering vacations, we're constantly evaluating. I guess I would just say that right now our best move is to attempt to fill the vacancies so that we can take and equally distribute the overtime, or more equally distribute the overtime, so that it doesn't center around single employees. And we're doing that with some of our initiatives, such as hiring emergency medical technicians. And then I would defer to either Town Manager Privatera, or congratulations on the promotion, Pete. Town Manager Hart or Finance Director Privatera, if they had wanted to elaborate on that more.
Okay, Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Response to Councilor Fay's good questions, a couple of points. Number one, I think the department does work to stagger the leaves and stagger the training, et cetera, in an effort to mitigate overtime. Filling the vacancies will be a tremendous benefit in terms of reducing the liability against the overtime line. As we've described, we're always going to have some number. We're always going to need overtime to a certain extent for the reasons we described, because we do not overstaff. Then in response to your concern about any one individual's pension, how does this extraordinary overtime they might be earning in a given year, how's that going to affect the town's long-term liabilities? Even our more veteran public safety employees are subject to a cap on their pension. And I think it's set at 95% of base salary, if I remember correctly. And Mr. Privatera can respond. So even folks that are in that bracket, their pension will never exceed that amount, even if they're earning these a somewhat extraordinary sum over a period of a few years.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Privatera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pete Privatera, Finance Director. Yes, there is a cap. I'm not sure if it's that high, but I know there is a cap on the pension that they can earn. So if you have an individual who is working an incredible amount of overtime hours and making a lot of money, that pension that individual receives will be capped. But I'm at this point, I don't know what it is, whether it's 80 or 90%, somewhere in that range, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Ms. Fay, back to you.
I am very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions for the fire department? I don't see any texts on my phone or hand raises. So with that, I don't know if you want me to go through you, Mr. Hart, or should we go directly to Chief? I'm not sure. Chief Reddick, I'm not sure. Mr. Hart, I'll go to you first.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I'd like to thank Chief Priest and Chief O'Callahan, Chief Cinsigali, and everyone from the fire department involved in tonight's presentation. And now through you, Mayor, would like to turn to Chief Riddick to present the police department proposed budget for next year.
Thank you very much. And again, also thank you to Chief Priest and Chief O'Callaghan and the whole team. Much appreciated. Well done. Chief Riddick, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Chief Priest, kudos to you. Excellent job. Very impressive. As I contemplated how I should begin my opening remarks, I struggled and I debated whether or not I should mention the mass shootings that left 8 people dead in Atlanta and 10 people dead in Boulder, Colorado. And as I began gathering my thoughts regarding the primary responsibilities of a West Hartford police officer, I said to myself, how do I not reference it? You see, you understand that all those persons who were killed in the recent incidents were innocent people going about their daily lives when gunfire erupted and tragically ended their lives. One of the primary responsibilities of a police officer is the preservation of life. During these horrific incidents, victims were fleeing or attempting to flee for safety, except for Officer Eric Talley, who was responding to the incident, responding to the shooter, the shooting. Unfortunately, the husband and father of 7 lost his life trying to save the lives of others. I want to commend the members of the West Hartford Police Department for their daily professionalism, their dedication to the town of West Hartford, and to the public at large. I'm especially proud of the officers for answering the bell during this past year, a most difficult year, when we responded to over 45 calls for service. It wasn't easy, but they did it. I'm extremely, extremely proud of them. You see, our job goes by and goes beyond just protecting and serving through crime prevention and apprehension. We also have proactive and reactive patrols. We visit businesses, schools, the elderly, etc. Our jobs include assisting the public through education, providing medical care, being empathetic, and exhibiting kindness. It is also our job to be open, transparent, and accountable when we do things right and occasionally when we have a misstep. In crafting our proposed FY22 police budget, it was very challenging, but we were able to achieve a near zero increase of 0.8% over our current year budget. This funding will allow us still to continue to provide appropriate police services. It is also important to note that we incurred a $28,000 increase for our non-payroll expenses. This increase is attributed to non-discretionary contractual obligations and legal mandates. For example, With the police accountability bill, $16,000 in excess costs for drug testing and psychological testing. Telestaff, contractual increase of $1,300. Contractual service maintenance agreement for our Faro machine of $8,500. A uniform allowance for plainclothes assignments, contractual $500. And for CMED, or EMS services coordination, $992. Lastly, in an attempt to mitigate impacts on our police budget, we have applied for and received over $134,000 in grant funding over this current year. Moreover, during our cost containment measures, we have saved over $145,000 in overtime costs. Thus far, this current fiscal year, we've had 10 police officers retire, and for the remainder of this calendar year, we have 12 police officers eligible for retirement. Although our hiring and retention remains a challenge, over the past year, we're able to hire 9 police officers with a racial and ethnic breakdown as follows: 1 Native American, 3 Hispanics, and 5 whites. Since May of 2018, 30% of our police officers hired were minorities, and 26% were women. We have also hired 2 civilian dispatchers, 1 black female, and 1 white female. I want to thank HR and our staff here in the PD for making a concerted effort to diversify our police department, civilian and sworn. I am also very pleased that during the numerous protests that occurred in town over the past year, no one was arrested and no one from the public or any police officers were injured. Our other accomplishments over the past year are as follows. PCR testing. One of our captains researched this and saw things happening in Seattle where they have paramedics as part of their police force. He brought the idea back to our police department, which I conveyed to Chief Priest, and being the Lamborghini that he is, he ran with it. And with his staff, they were able to have the paramedics provide that service to us. Over the years, as it expanded, and with the assistance of the FD, we were able to get several of our personnel certified to provide that testing. I also want to acknowledge the efforts of the mayor and the town manager for working with Jackson Lab. Thank you very much. Another accomplishment over the last year, coming to a tentative agreement with our police union 6 months prior to the expiration of their current CBA, and then subsequently having that tentative agreement ratified by the membership. I give thanks to the Union E-Board, their president, Detective Scott Seeger. Also, I want to thank Town Manager Hart and Rick Ledwick for their assistance to provide and present this unprecedented accomplishment. Additional accomplishment over the year, we were 75% completed with our state accreditation process. We have remaining a mock check, some evidence room inventory, and to correct our deficiencies in the future, then will be a final check. So we're well on our way. I want to thank AC Terra for his tireless effort going forth in this endeavor. By improving our officers' health and wellness, we entered into our partnership with ESI to provide our EAP services. The response that they've received so far has been very, very positive. We also entered into our partnership with the Interval House to provide services to victims of domestic violence. We have a social worker embedded 1 day a week in our police department. Again, I want to thank Mayor Cantor for her assistance in establishing this partnership and this connection. We purchased a drone over the past year to help us tremendously during our town events, covering protests, motor vehicle investigations. We also implemented our video sharing program in our local businesses, and has now expanded to Ring videos, improving our ability to assist the public in increasing our community policing efforts. As we rapidly approach FY22, we will focus on achieving the following. We will daily work to strengthen our relationship with the community and improving our use of social media. We will continue our efforts to improve minority hiring, 30% is great, but we want to strive for more. We will complete our state accreditation program. We will expand our efforts in Community Relations Division and as a department-wide getting into the community. We will expand our usage of technology to increase efficiencies and crime prevention. We will also expand our network of partnerships with other community agencies in an effort to provide excellent police services to our community. This current fiscal year, due to COVID, our revenue took a significant impact negatively. We are projecting approximately 8% decrease. Some of those revenue sources include fingerprinting, false alarms, solicitors, dog licensing, etc. However, we are anticipating projecting forward into FY22 that these revenues will rebound as the state continues to reopen, vaccinations increase, people get back to work. In addition, I want to thank the town manager, Rick Hart, as well as our personnel, Rick Levick, and well as our personnel here in the PD with the union. We introduced a supernumerary program last year, which our retired police officers can work the private duty jobs in the street once we've gone through the entire list in the police department. This way, the town does not lose revenue for unfilled jobs. We implemented this last September. Our first officer worked approximately in October. We have 14 officers signed up, 8 have worked, and we have brought so far $26,000 to revenue to the town. And we expect as the warmer weather increases and more officers work with more jobs, that revenue will increase. In closing, I want to thank all of my fellow directors, colleagues, the mayor, the town manager, and just everyone, even with town council. Thank you all for having a wonderful town. We do work together, although we disagree sometimes. And all of us together got us through, in my lifetime, the most difficult thing I've ever had to go through. And I have lost people in my family close to me, but nothing compares to this past year. So thank you all. You're professionals, and it's an honor to serve with you. And I'll entertain any questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Chief. And I cannot thank you. Are the right person for this leadership job. As hard as it is, we needed you. And I really, truly believe that you were put here for a reason, to assist, to help us and our community. And I'm so grateful for all your leadership and all that you have done. You are a strong, ethical, spiritual, and generous man, and we all feel it. Your officers needed it, as we all did, but you really have provided those very strong shoulders to carry us through this very, very challenging year. So so grateful for all that you do. I know the burden was heavy, but I much appreciate that you were there for us. And you are there for us. I also want to thank the PD. I personally, I sent Chief Riddick a note. I will say when, when I see families, whether it's a promotion or a swearing in, and you see these beautiful young families, often young families, and they are, they're just so proud and excited to support their loved one. And the heaviness of what happened in Colorado just really, it was just this wave of, wow, just that really important message that every single time our officers go out, they do not know what their day will bring. And so I just, again, thank not only all of our officers, but their families as well for the incredible support they provide. And I'm very glad to see the focus on wellness for our officers, especially during such a challenging time. So we will go to questions from counselors. Are there any? Well, I'll just start quickly on the revenue component piece. Kind of same deal as the American Rescue, plan, just making sure that we are the expectation in drop. I don't know, it's hard to relate specifically to COVID related costs, but the fact that we have seen a drop because of, we do believe COVID, what are we going to be allowed to do? But at least to be accounting for that, be aware of it, making sure that we are looking at that. And also, as Mr. Davidoff, as Deputy Mayor Davidoff said, we know of the exposures that took police officers off the line. And we did better than most because we had this in-house testing, but also the the costs of overtime for coverage when officers were offline. Obviously, that's something that's important. The other thing that actually that I was thinking about, and I didn't ask with the chief, but just making sure that the testing costs are also included in that as well. Whatever costs that we incurred for that, I think that's also is something that we have tracked and have determined that it will be reimbursable in some way, either through FEMA or the American Rescue. Right, Mr. Bervatera? Yeah.
Yes, Madam Mayor, we are looking at everything and anything. So again, I'm sure that we already have the COVID testing on our list. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Any questions for the chief, Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I would be remiss if I did not say something to Chief Riddick. The last year has been one that I don't think anyone could possibly have written a chapter like what had occurred, whether it be the pandemic and the illness and the response to COVID, whether it be the social justice and police reform, and the ability for people to interact in a civil and peaceful manner, to as you mentioned, the gun violence, which just continues on a track that we really need to put an end to this, and it just doesn't make any common sense anymore. It's just the loss of innocent life is just so upsetting, and especially when not that anyone's life is more important than others, but when somebody's in harm's way doing their job, and when you leave in the morning and say goodbye to your family, the expectation is that when your shift is over, you're going to come home and be with your family. And sometimes, and a lot of times in the past year, that has not occurred. And, fortunately here in town, we haven't had that scenario, but it is probably one of the hardest things to do as a leader of an organization, to console people that are within your quote work family, and to explain to them and to the community the loss of life. And as the mayor said, you are the right person at the right time. The attributes that you bring to the job are amazing. You, along with Chief Priest and the management of both public safety departments, in my opinion, rank West Hartford as the #1 public safety department in the state of Connecticut, without question. The talent that you bring, the expertise, the knowledge, the skill set, we can't put the dollar tag on any of that. And a lot of us take it for granted, but I know our residents don't. And the thing that they value always in the top 3 is public safety services. And we don't skip on that. And we provide that service all the time. So with that said, I just really felt it necessary this evening to say that thank you. Thank you to you for your leadership. Thank you to the men and women of the police force, whether they be civilian or sworn. Our community owes them a debt of gratitude. And I think the other part that's very important is our community of 60,000 plus people have experienced something that we've never experienced in our life. And one never knows on a given day what stresses somebody is going through that on a normal situation probably never would have occurred. So it is really taken a lot of different resources, a lot of different soul searching and thinking to address whatever may be the situation that arises. So thank you. It does not go unnoticed, and I'm truly appreciative. I do have one question, and that deals with a revenue source that obviously we've lost was on tickets. Okay, we're really haven't spent a lot of time on giving people tickets with respect to parking because we had a lot more, I would say, important things to be working on than wondering whether or not somebody was overparked for an hour or two. And one of the, I think, primary sources of our ticket revenue was the overnight parking, where people would incur a fine. I don't know how much it is. I usually park in my garage, so I don't really know what that is. But are we thinking that we're going to continue the current protocol with respect to allowing people to park on the street? And would that, what would be the impact if we did continue that policy from the spring until next winter in terms of revenue dollars lost?
Thank you, Mr. David. I'm actually going to have Mr. Hart answer that question. Sorry, Chief. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your question. So where we stand right now, as Council will recall, certainly when the pandemic hit, we suspended our overnight parking ban. And for the winter season, we did introduce a seasonal ban. At a staff level, we plan to recommend some options to the council after the budget season. One of the options, or actually our preferred recommendation that we're going to present to you, is that we revise our ordinance to create a resident overnight parking permit. So that would enable residents to park overnight with an appropriate permit. Obviously, during the winter, if a storm hits, they would need to move their car off the street. I couldn't answer off the top of my head as to how that might impact any type of fines or that sort of revenue, but we do think that that type of system would make sense for the town. We're not sure it would make sense to roll it out across the entire town. As you know, there are certain areas, such as west of the center, where we want to, where council adopted some restrictions a couple of years ago, and we think it makes sense for those to remain in place. But we will be coming to council through committee probably in the month of May with that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Davidoff, anything further?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Kerrigan, text me, and then Ms. Fay. So, Ms. Kerrigan?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Chief Reddick, I am happy that you chose to acknowledge the shooting in Colorado so frequently. We forget that as we are running away from danger, you and your staff, your team are running towards danger, knowing that it could be the last moment of your life. And the feeling of safety in our town is one that we all enjoy, take for granted, and you're charged with it. So I have the most respect for the job that you do in keeping us safe, and hope that you and your team will always stay safe. I also want to thank you for the initiatives, not just to diversify your workforce, but also the integration of interval house for women, and also including social workers in your staff. But I just wanted to take a moment to share after George Floyd murder, when the Black Lives Matter had not really a protest, but a showing, the community came together to acknowledge what had been done. You stood before our community and shared your personal story. Your story as a Black man that was racially profiled and knew of the injustice. And instead of complaining about it, you chose to do something about it. You chose to become a policeman and to change it from within. And I know that that story, your personal story, moved so many people. And I was fortunate enough to be in front and record it and put it out on social media. So I want to thank you for sharing your own story with our community because it really means a lot. So we are thankful every day for you keeping our town safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Carrigan. Okay, over to Ms. Fay.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor, through you. You know, it's been crazy what's been happening around the country, and senseless acts and lives taken. I have the utmost respect for all our chiefs and all our public safety officials. And Chief Riddick, I've gotten to know you a little bit. I hope to get to know you better. I'm thrilled that you're in our town and you're leading our public safety police officers, staff. And I know we're going to see really, really great things. So thank you for everything. My question is probably going to sound ridiculous, but I've heard from people in town. You hear complaints about the traffic and people speeding and the way they, road rage and all this stuff. Is it true that municipalities who, enforce traffic regulations and pull somebody over, that the revenue goes to the state and not to the town? So I wanted to know about that, because people said, I've been hearing rhetoric about, well, they don't pull anybody over because all the money goes to the state. So why should they bother? So I don't know if that's true or if it's a myth. So I would love your thoughts on that. And then when we're talking about gun violence, I'm certainly a proponent of the Second Amendment within reason. I don't personally partake in it, but the violence in Hartford is really appalling. And I saw that there was another shooting and death today. So I think it goes way beyond these sensational, horrible, horrific acts of what happened in Georgia. But, we've got it really close to our own community. And I just pray that we can solve some of this, because it's harmful, it's destructive, it hurts so many lives. So my question really is about the tickets for traffic enforcement. But I do want to thank you and Chief Priest and all the officers and all the people, the firefighters. I live in a great town. I'm very happy about living here, and I'm proud of all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Chief Riddick, over to you.
To you, Madam Mayor. First, thank all of you for the kind comments, but I appreciate it. I believe I was brought here by the Lord. I really do, in my heart of hearts. But we have really good people here, and you can, quote unquote, be a decent leader, but if you don't have good people working, it doesn't matter. You could be the best coach, and if you don't have good players, it doesn't matter. So kudos goes to the men and women going out there every single day, sworn and civilian. Regarding the specific question, the infractions, 75% goes to the state and 25% goes back to the town. So that would be us. However, as most of us know, with a town ordinance, 100% of that goes back to the town.
Thank you, Chief Riddick. Ms. Fay, anything further?
I'm not sure I understood the last part. So 75 goes to the state, 25 to us, but then how does it come back to us? I'm just kind of curious.
Chief
Town ordinance, a town ordinance violation, that revenue would stay with the town.
Thank you, Chief Riddick. So if that overnight parking violation would be a town revenue, correct, Chief Riddick?
That is correct, yes.
Yes, but a violation of a state speeding law, was the speeding limits that are set by the state would be split 75-25.
That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fay.
No, thank you very much, Chief Riddick. I wanted to be able to respond to people because I didn't understand that. So thank you for the clarification. That's very, very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gold.
Didn't want to feel left out, and through you, Mayor Cantor, thank you. And to Chief Riddick, I guess to sum up everybody, thank you truly for what you are doing. As I mentioned to Chief Priest before, it's truly yeoman's work going and being able to manage, go through this whole process over the last year, sharing your personal stories and being a leader as Chief Priest is as well. of our public safety departments. And it's truly an honor to know both of you and you as well, and seeing the job that you're doing and protecting us truly. Does not go unnoticed. So thank you. Most of my questions were answered by my colleagues. I did have one question, and maybe I should have asked also the Chief Priest, but it kind of goes hand in hand and maybe more towards Mr. Privatera. In terms of, I guess, workers' compensation, have there been any loss in the department relative to COVID and claims in that regard for like in terms of workers' compensation claims at all, if any?
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Chief Priest? Chief Riddick, I'm sorry. Chief Riddick.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I am unaware of any workman's comp claims that have been gone forward in which there's been payouts. I'm not aware of that. It does not mean it hasn't occurred, but I'm not aware of that.
Thank you, Chief Riddick. I don't know if Mr. Privatera would be able to weigh in. I don't think so. Mr. Privatera, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Pete Privatera, Finance Director. I'm also unaware of any workers' comp claims that have been filed related to COVID. Again, we certainly can go back and check, but none have been brought to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Gold, back to you. Anything further?
All set. Thank you.
Oh, you're all set? Okay, thank you. All right. I think that's it. I don't, all right. So are we all set with questions for Chief Riddick and Police Department? Anything further? Okay. Well, again, thank you very, very much, Chief Riddick, for your really extraordinary leadership and your partnerships, and your creative thinking and your inspiration. Appreciate it. All right, Mr. Hart, now to you for your introduction for the next item.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager, and I'd also like to thank Chief Riddick for doing an excellent job with tonight's budget presentation. One thing I wanted to highlight for the council, and I'm sure this will be telling for our more veteran council members like the mayor and the deputy mayor, and that is the very strong and effective working relationship between the police department and the fire department. And historically, you know, I don't think we enjoyed that, but we certainly have it now. We have it now. It's something that both chiefs have worked very hard to establish, and we really have seen the benefits of that partnership during this past year. It certainly extends beyond public safety to include a whole host of departments, health department, social services, and others. But at the core, having that good, strong working relationship between police and fire is so critical in today's environment. So kudos to both chiefs for their great work there. I would now like to introduce our Interim Director of Community Development, Dwayne Martin, who also has been doing a tremendous job, short-staffed in some ways over the past several months, and really appreciate what Dwayne has brought to the table. Now he's been with the town for some years now. He's got a lot of great experience and some new ideas. And Dwayne, really appreciate you stepping up to the plate to take on this interim role. So through you, Mayor, I'd like to now turn to Mr. Martin.
Mr. Martin, again, thank you for all that you do. You are a leader. I'm always so impressed with your attention to service and your response to many residents. Nobody gets more emotional about about so many of the things that you need to respond to. So so grateful for your patience and your customer service and your leadership. So over to and stepping up to this. To assisting in all that you're doing with community services. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the record, Dwayne Martin. I'm the Acting Director of Community Development and the Town Engineer. I just want to say that pleased to present the budget for community development tonight, but unhappy with the slot on my agenda here. to follow the fire and police department. I don't know who set this up, but tough acts to follow, but I'll do the best that I can. I'll start off by saying that we have a negative budget, so I assume that's a good thing, and I'll explain that there's some moving parts to explain the backstory on that. But I wanted to take a few minutes just to go over the department's primary responsibilities, our fiscal year 21 accomplishments, fiscal year 22 goals, and then I'll quickly go through some of the increases in the budget, and of course we can go over the decreases if needed. Community development, if you've looked at the summary, is the community development department is planning to change, and what I mean by that is there's some reduction in staff or positions that are in the budget that are unfunded, and I'll go through those in a minute, but also there is a movement of the economic development coordinator position out of community development and into the town manager's budget. So you'll see that there's a good amount of changes in the management division component of community development, specifically with the primary responsibilities of community development. So minus economic development, we have the building, engineering, and planning divisions. And so our primary responsibilities are maintaining and improving our public infrastructure. That's not to say that public works and others do not play a role in that, but specifically the engineering division gets involved in many infrastructure projects, some replacements, some small, some big maintenance projects, specifically road paving as an example. We do a lot of road projects, sidewalk replacements, sidewalk installations, or ADA improvements for our sidewalk infrastructure. We have a number of drainage projects to handle flooding issues or an aging drainage system. Traffic safety infrastructure, for which there's many components. It could be a traffic signal, it could be signage, pavement markings, etc. So there's a lot of public infrastructure that we're responsible for overseeing. In addition to that, we try to protect public health and safety through enforcement of our building codes and also our planning and zoning regulations. So obviously the building department is in charge of the building codes, and a lot of their responsibility is to make sure that redevelopments or developments are done in a safe manner according to those codes, which then down the line helps with reductions in our emergency responses. As I mentioned, planning and zoning regulations, predominantly the planning division will get involved in redevelopment reviews or even the smallest matter to a fence or a shed. And then along those lines, all three divisions oversee many, many different types of permit applications. And as I mentioned, redevelopment applications, the roles of those three divisions are shared on that component as well. So there's many building, engineering, and planning and zoning permits that we review on a daily basis. Sometimes residents or property owners are not happy with our responsibility in enforcing the codes and the regulations, but it is with good intent to maintain a high quality of life for the residents of West Hartford. Moving on to our fiscal year 21 accomplishments, just wanted to list off 4 of them. As we all know, the pandemic changed quite a bit as to how we continue to do business, specifically our building division, and thank you to Bob Palmer and his crew in the facilities department for creating a window on the side of Town Hall to facilitate the many visitors to our building division. It started off with primarily just activity for the building division, but then it expanded to also our planning division and a few other divisions in the town hall. People see the window and they assume that's where I need to go to drop something off or ask a question. But it's been very successful. There was an awning and a walkway added just before winter hit, and the plan is to keep that active. It's been really well received. So thank you again, Bob, for that. Also with the building division, another accomplishment was our ability to change how we do some of our inspections. And by way of that, I mean our remote video inspections to help with a lot of the interior inspections that are required by the building division, instead of having a staff person go inside a building and getting potentially exposed to that. And that program has received thousands of inspections, so it's been very successful as well. Our award-winning expanded outdoor dining in the center and a few other areas was really well received by the public. We're planning on returning that primarily on LaSalle Road, Farmington Ave, but a few other locations in town. That was quite an accomplishment. It wasn't just community development. There were others that were involved, but community development did play a large role in coordinating and getting that accomplished. So I wanted to point that one out. And then lastly, fiscal year 21 accomplishment is our acquisition of a grant for New Park Avenue, which is a planned complete streets improvement project. It spans from Oakwood Ave down to New Britain Ave, and it's intended to change the overall appearance of that corridor and take advantage of some of the complete streets elements that it has and more that it is lacking to connect the Trupper Trail, the bus stations, and potentially a future rail station near Flatbush Avenue. So those are the accomplishments from fiscal year 21. On to fiscal year 22. I'm going to list 4 of our goals. First one is City View application. So the building and planning divisions and maybe a few others use City View as a platform to have access to permits that are obtained primarily through the building and planning division. But again, as I mentioned, the pandemic is changing how we're doing business. So the idea is to expand the application of City View and roll it out in a greater module for building, planning, and the engineering divisions and allow online permitting and credit card payments. So we are actively working on that, and we're hoping to roll that out later on this year. I think the target is August or September of this year. So much more to come on City View. I heard the question about speeding in town, which is a problem, not just West Hartford, but it does happen quite a bit, and we do get a lot of complaints. So we are interested, the engineering division, in rolling out a traffic calming program, and we've completed a draft of that, and we are looking to meet with Manager Hart to review some of the components of that before we bring it to the council. But the idea is to roll out a traffic calming program to improve safety as well as reduce speeding, primarily in our neighborhood streets. But you'll hear more about that in the near future. Plan of Conservation and Development, which was recently approved, had many action items in it. And so one of the goals is to accomplish as many of those action items as we can moving through the fiscal year. And then lastly, I mentioned New Park Avenue. There's also a goal of promoting transit-oriented development along that corridor. And we've hired a consultant, and that process has started as well. So moving on from that, I just wanted to highlight some of the elements of the budget. As I mentioned, overall, we have a negative budget, which is great. But the reason that we're able to achieve that, as I mentioned, is there's a staff person moving out of the management division of community development and into the town manager's office. That's the economic development coordinator. Changes in my personal role, as was mentioned, formerly the town engineer, now the acting director of community development, as well as the town engineer. So the community development director position will be left unfunded. There's another position in engineering, a civil engineer 2 position, that will be left unfunded. Some of that is made up in engineering with part-time staff. You'll see that in the budget. And then there's also an assistant zoning enforcement officer position that will be left unfunded in the planning division. So specifically going through the budget quickly before questions, as a department as a whole, you'll see that we have a reduction in revenues by 1.4%. That was particularly influenced by the pandemic. Hopefully we bounce back from that. And then the expenditures, mostly because of the position changes that I mentioned, are down by 12%. Management division, a reduction just because it is a change in the location of that individual from that division into the town manager, so a reduction of 94.9%. And continuing on, the engineering division, we did have an increase in temporary payroll, that's listed there. That's to make up for some of the loss of the full-time employee. So there is a 100% increase in that line item. Flipping forward to the building division, in the expenditures section, there is an increase of 39% in the information technology line. That's associated with City View. As I mentioned before, we're expanding that application and module functionality, but the cost resided for the maintenance fee for that application in the building division's budget. So there is an increase because of the expansion of that platform And then lastly, flipping to the Planning and Zoning Division, in dues and travel, there is a 100% increase in primarily because of the dues related to staff certifications. And then contractual services, a 125% increase. As I mentioned, that is for a consultant to assist with our transit-oriented development initiative on New Park Avenue. And with that, I will open it up to any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Are there any questions for Mr. Martin? Comments, questions? So I think we understand the, so any for the traffic calming, that what will come, that is not included in this budget. It is there's not cost that would be associated with that yet, correct? Or am I, maybe we'll see it on the CIP, I don't know.
You will see it on the CIP. Yes, there is a component of the CIP for traffic system management. That's where we intend to use funds to accomplish some of the goals of the traffic calming program.
Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Lee Gold, to Mr. Martin. Well, I applaud your efforts of a decrease in this department. Going forward, obviously, you've shifted an employee out. Is there an intent to backfill and refill and increase going forward, or are you planning in future years to maintain this same directory?
Thank you, Mr. Gold. I will go to Mr. Hart on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Manager. Thank you, Councilor Gold, for your question. You know, a lot of that is to be determined. Mr. Martin and I are in an ongoing conversation about the future, but as he said, that department will be carrying a number of unfunded positions next year, and we have increased some of the part-time lines in order to provide some part-time assistance. You know, that only goes so far to a certain extent, but that is our plan for next year, and then we will evaluate for the year following.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Gold? All set? Okay. All right. Any other questions? Mr. Davidoff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Martin, seems like quite a lot of activity taking place in the community development sector despite COVID. And I think it's pretty impressive that we're estimating that $1.6 million in building permit activity has taken place, where a lot of the supplies necessary to complete projects are not available. So with that said, I think a lot of people have pent-up demand once we return to, quote, hopefully normal sooner than later. And some of the projects that we have approved at the council level, whether it be One Park or Berkshire Road or all these new restaurants that are attracted to West Hartford and want to repurpose spaces for places that were unable to make it. And I think we haven't really even seen the fallout yet in terms of what's going to happen in the office space and reconfiguration. So I'm just wondering, is our number of using the same 1.6 million more on the conservative side than that? And from a historical perspective, do you know if we've ever had a number greater than that 1.6 million?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. I'll go to Mr. Martin, but I think Mr. Privatera will have a little say in here too. So Mr. Martin, we'll start with you, but you can pass if you feel more comfortable.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'll start the second part of that. I will ask Mr. Privatera to to answer. It is a conservative number. When we were working on the budget, I think the process starts in November and continues into December. Obviously we were still in the worst parts of the pandemic, and vaccinations were being discussed, but I don't think they were quite rolled out at that point. We didn't know how that process was going to go and its impact overall on the revenue for the building permits. Now, having said that, we did see a lot of activity in the building division. As I understand it, or perhaps it's my opinion, that people not able to travel, that were still able to get an income during the pandemic, wanted to reinvest in their properties. To some degree, there was still a heavy activity there for building permits, maybe not overall a reflection on the revenue because of the larger redevelopment activity. But I agree with you. There seems to be a good amount on the doorstep, and since the change of the new year, it seems as though we're heading in a much more positive direction with the pandemic and perhaps some of the federal assistance and other funding sources. So that number could be overly conservative, but it was a difficult time to really predict, is what I will say. But I don't know if Mr. Privatera wants to add to that, but I would ask him to answer the second. I don't know where we stand compared to past budgets on that line.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Privatera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pete Privatera, Finance Director. When we closed out last year, and again, that was part of the pandemic year, our building permit revenue came in close to 1.5 million. This year, after 6 months of activity, which were pretty much in the height of the pandemic, we still pulled in about 760,000 for 6 months. So we're well on target to hit 1.6 million plus maybe this year. Although we had a lesser amount of permits, I believe the individual permit value was greater, because when we were presenting to the credit agencies, I did recall there was a slight dip in the number of permits, but the value of the permits were greater. So my expectation is that we're going to hit our target this year and possibly exceed what we have next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Hart had a good comment. At when Blueback Square was built, there were very high permit revenues during that time period, and the garages, obviously. So that was probably our record. But there is a lot in the pipeline, and there could be some wonderful growth here in revenue. So. Any other comments, questions? Okay. I don't see any. All right, then we will go to our final item that I had besides other. Mr. Hart, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager, and congratulations to Mr. Martin on his first budget presentation to the Town Council as Acting Director. Great job. And you will see Mr. Martin again, council members, when we review the CIP. He plays a very, very significant role there. So Mr. Palmer is now our cleanup hitter for tonight, if you will. And his department, full of unsung heroes, people who've been here each and every day throughout. And I also want to thank Bob and his colleague, Lisa Michaud, our risk manager, for leading our municipal recovery team. And some of the councilors may not be aware of that. They're the co-chairs of that committee. So all the major decisions we've made about closing our facilities and then reopening them, making our buildings safe, they have led that effort and done a tremendous job. And plant and facilities also is one of our shared services department. So not only does it support the town, but also the West Hartford Public Schools. And it's a very, very significant inventory that they oversee and manage. So through you, Mayor, I'd like to now call on Mr. Palmer to make his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And I also want to congratulate Mr. Martin. Thank you very much. Very well done. And also, Mr. Palmer, this year, obviously, there was just so much importance, I think, and awareness of plant and facilities and and all that you do in preparing and cleaning and protecting our employees. And I remember most specifically when the police early on in the pandemic, the assurances and the commitment that you provided to the police department and making sure that they would be very, the facilities would be cleaned and safe for them. And I just want to, again, thank you for your incredible commitment. And Lisa, again, thank you for your leadership and all that you do to make sure that things run and getting us back up and started again. So, all right, over to you, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Bob Palmer, Director of Plant Facility Services. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the comments, and Town Manager Hart. I would certainly like to continue that conversation and to recognize all the efforts of all my staff and employees in Plant Facility Services who have worked since this pandemic began, have had to adapt and change, and constantly throughout this process, as the guidance changed, as the virus changed, as conditions changed, they are very flexible and willing to take on new responsibilities, change their shifts, change the methods that they were utilizing, and to do the best job that they could. So they really pulled together as a team, and we really shined. So I think we did, we really stepped up and really were able to address the needs, especially of our public safety facilities and also our other critical infrastructure employees, DPW and others. So it's been a very challenging year for everybody, but they've really stepped up and really done a great job. So I'm very proud of them, and glad to be part of that team and leading that team. So going into our annual budget. So for those who are new to the town, the Plant and Facility Services is really the steward of the town's buildings, both Board of Town buildings and the Board of Education buildings. For this budget presentation, I'm focused just on town buildings, but we do take care of both. So we do that through a program of daily service, which includes mostly custodial and some light maintenance. We also have planned maintenance and unplanned maintenance. Those services are provided through some trades folks that we have on staff, but also mostly through contracted services. And we also have a capital improvement program that we utilize to improve our buildings overall, to make investments over time in them. So that's really the mission and how our department functions. Some of the highlights over this last year, obviously the pandemic has dominated our work. So that was really, we continued, we started back in March of last year, and that continued all of this year. It really was the focus of our work, making our buildings safe for our employees to come back, creating safe spaces, changing the way we were cleaning, improving the way we were cleaning, and having a focus on safety. So a lot of training, a lot of learning, and adapting to the ever-changing situation. So again, very proud of everybody in the way that they've handled themselves in the last year, and it improved. And we're coming through this very well. So I'm very proud. As you recall, last year at this time, we were thinking, and the initial budget proposal was to reduce the part-time custodial staff. And we had that conversation in this meeting and said that probably wasn't a good idea. And that wasn't, and that was the right decision, of course, at the time. So I was able to hire several new part-time people, really well-qualified people and good employees who, and I've been able to retain those people for the past year. So I've had absolutely zero turnover after those initial hirings. And pre-pandemic, we struggled with hiring and retaining part-time people, but the pandemic changed that dynamic substantially. So we've been able to hire really great people and to keep them. So that's pandemic. So, and I thank you for your support on that last year. That was a great decision. So. The other great things that have happened this year is we continue to do great things with energy conservation. Catherine Deviney, who I know you're all very familiar with, continues to be a superstar for us, and continues our efforts on reducing energy consumption. Specifically, our electricity use continues to go down, partly due to the pandemic and the reduced operations in the town and school buildings, but also in just ongoing energy conservation projects that she takes on. So, as you know, she has tons of energy herself and continues to motivate us to do more and more things and to engage in different programs and to be creative about the way that we do things. So she's certainly a tremendous asset to us and brings a lot of enthusiasm and great ideas and helps us to implement those things. So we've continued to do large solar installations such as King Philip this year. We've offset our electricity use with renewable energy credits, which allows us to claim 100% green energy for the town. We've received a climate protection award for our participation in the virtual net metering program, which was a great accolade. Very creative program that was offered to us, and we took a leap in it and participated in it, and we're actually looking at another one right now. So it's really a win-win for us on that. Something new that we're doing this year is we're going to participate in Eversource and ISO New England's electricity demand response programs. So where we voluntarily reduce our power load during peak energy periods in order to get reduced rates and to generate a little bit of income for us. So we already pretty much do that anyhow. So we'll hopefully make a little bit of money in that as we do that. So some of our goals going into our next fiscal year is to continue to improve our customer communication and develop more customer service metrics. We really want to engage with our customers, which are mostly internal folks for the town and the Board of Education. We want to know how we're doing, what we're doing, and what we could do better for them. We'll continue to be the leader in the energy conservation and sustainability programs. We're working towards more certifications in the Sustainable CT program. That's a big goal for everybody in the organization, and it's a organization-wide effort that is just more than plant and facilities, but goes across all of our departments in the town. So we'll continue to look for energy efficiency opportunities in everything that we do, from daily operations, capital improvements, and other creative programs that we can enroll in and take part in. And then we'll just continue to assess and plan to run our buildings and our operations as efficiently as we can for both the town and the Board of Ed as we move forward. So, in looking at our budget summary, which is on page 12.2 of the budget, it's really, for the most part, a roll forward budget. You do see a large increase in operating expense, and this is due to contributions to the energy services,
Utility Services Fund.
Utility Services Fund, thank you. It says it's a little bit of a complicated accounting process, but in general, utility costs are increasing slightly, but not by that much, of course. So it's obviously a financial transaction with our Utility Services Fund that creates that large number. The actual increase is not that large. So overall, we're running pretty much a flat budget. Some of the highlights in this is, we will be losing, we will not fund a part-time plumbing position on the town side. A few years ago, we had a full-time plumber who retired. That person had been working for us part-time for the last few years and was doing a good job and was keeping up with the workload. And this year will not be funded. That person has taken a leave and is planning not to return at this point. So we're going to not fund that position for the next fiscal year. We'll backfill that with contractual services. So we might end up spending a little bit more there than we would than having a part-time employee. But that's the offset to that. We won't know that for sure until the end of the year. So. We do transfer in money from the capital improvement fund in order to fund our capital project staff. We have an administrative assistant and a capital projects manager. Those costs are covered through the capital improvement program. And that's what the transfer from other funds is that comes into the planned facilities budget. So in going on to page 12-3, which is the details, again, you see the large increase on the utilities line item. Again, it's due to the transfers to the Utility Services Fund in order to adjust that balance of the fund. There's really no substantial changes in that area overall in the payroll. So in the last year, I think the one notable thing is that our overtime costs have obviously come down. You know, a lot of our overtime was driven by supporting events in the town hall auditorium, other events at Elmwood Community Center. Obviously, those types of events haven't been going on for the last year, so we've had some pretty significant savings in the overtime budget in that area. So, so that's generally it for that section. If you go to section 12, page 12.7, it talks about the Capital Projects Management Division. It's a pretty simple budget. It's really 2 people and some very limited expenses associated with them. It's really just mostly salaries for that division. So, yeah. And then lastly, we have the Utility Services Fund, and I'm going to ask either Mr. Privatera to provide an explanation of that for us.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Privatera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pete Privatera, Finance Director. With respect to the utilities, the utility costs in Mr. Palmer's budget, normally what we do is we will smooth out a surplus over a number of years. For the past couple of years, in an effort to keep the tax increase down, we were somewhat more aggressive in smoothing it in than in the past. And you can see by what the actual expense was in 1920 and what we adopted in 2021. You know, we're hoping that, you know, we can get back to a more reasonable schedule of smoothing in surplus. I know that Catherine Deviney is very conservative in our estimating, and we usually have a surplus at the end of the year. But as I said, you know, in order to keep the tax increases down in prior years, we're a little more aggressive than we normally were. The Utility Services Fund, basically, all the contributions from our different cost areas, you know, Bob Palmer has it in his budget, John Phillips, DPW has it, even Fire has it, and the Board of Ed go into the Utility Services Fund as a contribution. All the expenses are paid out of the Utility Services Fund, and whenever there is a surplus related to any energy saving opportunities, that surplus resides in the Utility Services Fund, and that's what we use to smooth out the expenses over time, as well as, you know, Catherine Deviney's salary gets paid out of the utility services. The Utility Services Fund is split between the town and the board. The predominant portion of the ending surplus balance is the Board of Education. The town does have some surplus balance, and you will see in some departments that their allocation actually went down. But again, the way this works is if there's any savings, it'll reside in this fund, and we'll try to smooth out the savings over the next few years. So that's how the Utility Services Fund works.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Back to you, Mr. Palmer, just in, I guess, if you want to close or maybe we'll hold the mic with you for questions.
Sure. Yeah, and just some further comments on energy. So really the electrical costs are pretty stable right now. We're locked in for several years at the same rate for the next several years. Natural gas has been very stable for the past several years. We're not locked in. We're floating with the gas company on the rate, but it has been very stable. We do see a little bit of an increase in coming for next year. Water continues to be a major wild card for us with the MDC. So the surcharges associated with the Clean Water Act continue to escalate. And we continue to look for ways to conserve water as best we can. This past year, with the drought during the summer and our irrigation needs, you know, our water usage increased substantially. So even despite the fact that we didn't open a couple of our outdoor pools, which are again our big water users. So you know, the water has been on our radar for a few years. We're continuing to watch that. I know that Mr. Privatera and Catherine Deviney have been meeting with the MDC to talk about different strategies of trying to get some of those costs under control. But you know, I think when I first started here 14 or 15 years ago, I think water was about $100,000, and you know, it's obviously tripled at this point. So it's really become a major player up in our utilities budget. So we're continuing to watch that and look for ways to conserve water. So, and with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Yeah, that is the question. And, to be honest, it is helpful to have the hydrants and the water separated because otherwise that was not something that we could so readily keep track of. And the usage and obviously weather-related demands. The utility use for the town I was expecting it to go down a little bit more for the current year than, and go back up really for the projected, for the proposed budget. But I just wanted and again, this is early when you're making these kind of assumptions for the remainder of the year and then going forward, but now I can't find the page. It's the town, where was that?
1210, Mayor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Right. So even though our buildings were unoccupied, we still had some people in the buildings. So we still had to heat and cool those buildings. The other thing that we've done for the pandemic is to increase ventilation times. So we've increased the amount of fresh air that we're bringing into the building. So we're heating and cooling needs are increased, and we're also running our systems longer in order to flush out the buildings, in order to get more air exchanges through the building. So, we did a lot of work early on to go through our systems and to make those adjustments, but also to clean. We actually thought we would be running deficits in the energy budgets instead of having savings, because we knew that by running the systems longer and with more fresh air that we would be utilizing more energy. But we went through and did very thorough cleanings and tune-ups of all our systems as we implemented this, and that proved to balance out the usage and the increased energy costs. So we were actually quite surprised. And in the beginning, as we began the budget process back in November, December, we were projecting much higher. We were actually projecting deficits in the energy accounts, but now we feel like we're going to have a little bit of a surplus in the accounts because of the efficiencies we gained there. So.
Okay. Then, and is that a similar story to the schools, or is that
very similar? Yeah. Probably we used a lot more natural gas than we anticipated because of the fresh air and the heating. But so far, we'll see what the spring air conditioning season brings us as we go forward here and what the weather does to us. It's really going to be dependent on how much hot weather we have and how much electricity we end up using for cooling. But yeah, so we feel like we're going to be right on budget and not running a deficit, which we're very fearful back in back in the fall. We were thinking we were going to run pretty significant deficits in these areas. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, opening up to questions to any one of my other counselors. Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To Mr. Palmer. So, like all the other departments, nobody would have anticipated what the past year would be and what the struggles that you would have had to encounter. So I presume that we as a municipality encountered the same thing. Our residents encountered the ability to find cleaning materials and things of that nature. Can you elaborate on what struggles we may have had in terms of procurement for getting basic cleaning? And obviously the protocols probably have changed in terms of being from clean to super clean, okay? Because the expectation of anybody entering our buildings was, I'm not going in there unless that place is really very clean and sterile. So you could just enlighten us with that and what you anticipate going forward as we start to bring employees back and allow the public to utilize buildings that have been closed for a period of time, such as the library, such as the senior centers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Mr. Palmer?
Sure. Thank you. Bob Palmer, Director of Plant Facilities. So early on, the disinfectant that we were utilizing with the town and the Board of Education did not kill the coronavirus. So, and we could not get a disinfectant that would kill, but that was certified to kill the coronavirus. So we switched to bleach and water solution as a kind of an interim thing. And then eventually we were able to get a product in that allowed us to in our mixing stations within our custodial closets, that allowed us to do that. So we were able to, after a little bit of time, I think by the end of summer, we were able to get regular product back by the time the schools opened. So we were able to do that. And we've been able to get product since then. So it hasn't, that initial 3 to 4 months was a problem at time. And again, we just switched to bleach and water as a simple solution for that. So we were able to do that. So especially in the beginning, as far as the level of cleanliness, we didn't know a lot. So there was a lot of anxiety about people who were still working, public safety, DPW, et cetera. So we were really focused on high touch surfaces, really disinfecting everything every day, multiple times a day. Though as time has gone on and we've learned more about it, and CDC has issued more guidance in public health, we've learned more about that. The primary transmission method is through the air. Surface transmission is minimal, so we were able to kind of scale back our focus on surfaces as much as we were doing. Though we're still disinfecting everything every day, we're not doing it as much as we were. So, but we still had shifted our staff to primarily, they worked mostly evenings after people had gone home for the day to clean. But now most of our buildings have at least one person in the building during the day to hit those high touch surfaces, hit the restrooms, get into elevators and other high touch areas, and to be able to respond to anything specific if there's any type of an incidents with that. So it's changed our focus immensely in the way that we staff, in the way that we do clean. So it has, and it's for the better. And, going forward, I think with the program that we have right now is probably where we're going to be for at least the next year or two, with a high emphasis on cleanliness, getting the disinfection, and just keeping things as clean as we can. So, but, the staff's adapted well. I think we've all learned how to live and coexist with the virus, and we know it works. We've been very fortunate in the workplace. We haven't had large outbreaks or known transmission occurring in the workplace because of cleanliness. So a tribute to all our employees again for doing a really great job, and for everybody being proactive. But it also takes all the occupants being helping us out too. So we obviously can't do everything. So we've empowered them to clean their personal workspaces, and we've given them the disinfectant and the wipes and stuff like that to do that. So that, it's really a team effort amongst everybody. Of course, we're doing the heavy lifting because that is our job, but we also have to have the assistance of everybody who's working in the buildings as well as the public as they come back in. So,
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Davidoff?
And I have one further question, and that'll be through you, Madam Mayor. Just wrong. So I presume that we put in protective plexiglass into various workspaces, and I presume, like all the other departments, we've documented all the expenses that were incurred with respect to that.
yes, we have. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Mr. Palmer, sorry, go ahead. Okay, you got your answer. Yes, we have.
Yes, we have. Sorry.
Yes. All right. Anything further, Mr. Davidoff? Nope. Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, Lee Gold, to Mr. Palmer. Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. Question: have you gone through, I guess, the buildings themselves? You're talking about the internal workings and of the buildings. In terms of their usefulness still, whether or not they are categorized in terms of levels of ability to continue to maintain, in hopes of maybe a contraction of buildings, so to speak. Is that something that you've identified, and maybe that could be a future cost savings going forward in terms of a consolidation strategically?
Thank you, Mr. Gold. I will go to Mr. Palmer, but I expect Mr. Hart's going to have some input too. Mr. Palmer.
Okay. Bob Palmer, Director of Plant Facility Services. So yes, I have done assessments regarding buildings, facilities assessment regarding most of the buildings. I still have some more to go, which assesses their overall condition and talks about future planned projects, what type of investments we do. So, you know, what works with the buildings, what doesn't work with the buildings. And Mr. Hart and I, as we meet periodically, are able to discuss those, and we've been talking about developing an overall building strategy, planning strategy for the next several years, as to what we do with our inventory building, how we move forward. So yeah, we are at the point where several of our buildings need major work, and we're just continuing to evaluate where we can have consolidations, and also we can gain efficiencies with our building stock. So
thank you, Mr. Hart. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just to add on to Mr. Palmer's response, thank you, Councilor Gold, for the question. Mr. Palmer has prepared a baseline assessment for each of our major municipal facilities, not the schools, but on the town side. And we've presented some of that information to Council previously, and I think we'd like to do it again coming out of the budget process. But we have focused to date really on two areas. One is in the area of what I would loosely describe as community services, and that is our planned acquisition of the St. Bridget School, as the council discussed at its meeting just a couple of days ago, where we're looking to consolidate hopefully a number of leisure services and library services in one location, and that will give us an opportunity to repurpose one or more older buildings. And then secondly, we've been looking at the area of public safety, and we do have funds in the capital budget approved in the previous year to begin to look at that issue, in particular a new public safety station that could also include a fire station on the same campus. So that I expect will be an important strategic project priority for the council in the years to come. Those are the two areas where we have focused to date.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Anything further, Mr. Gold? Mr. Hart, go ahead. Mr. Hart has something further. Go ahead.
Yes, I forgot, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Also, Brixton Street, and Mr. Palmer can elaborate on that. Council has funded an architectural study looking at the Brixton Street campus, and we received a very good study with some key options. We are looking to build out the transfer station located at that site. We're going to be improving the animal shelter, as well as our indoor shooting range, which is a very valuable and unique asset that we have there. So that's been another area of focus.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Gold.
All set. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Anything further for Mr. Palmer?
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I don't see any further questions from the council. We're a little light on council, so once they have an opportunity to watch this presentation, they may have some follow-up questions, and we welcome that, and we encourage it. So I hope that's the case, so everyone feels comfortable with what's in this budget book. So, all right, Mr. Hart, anything further from you before we close?
Mayor, thank you. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just want to thank all the directors for their strong presentations this evening, as well as the budget team for being here, and council members as well. We know that this takes a lot of time for the council, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And I couldn't agree more. Thank you all for your leadership and really steadfast commitment and stepping up during a really, really, really challenging year. And looking forward to better days, although the demands will be a little bit of everything, I think. So no question, it's challenging. So Mr. Palmer, thank you again for your work and throughout, and all of the directors that presented tonight. Much appreciated. And without any objection, we will adjourn. Any objection? Seeing none, have a good rest of your evening. Thank you all.